Good morning. Today we're going to be talking about the New Deal, relief, recovery, and reform. Franklin Roosevelt was the President of the United States from March 4th, 1933, until his death in April of 1945. He was the president through the Great Depression and through World War II. And for many people, this is obviously one of the darkest times in American history, Great Depression, World War II. Franklin Roosevelt himself, when he came to power, did not have an ideology. He did not have a definitive plan of how to get us out of the Great Depression. He did realize, though, that what the American public was looking for wasn't perfection, but they wanted to see that the President of the United States was going to try something different than what Herbert Hoover was trying. Roosevelt's belief was, we'll try it. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. If that doesn't work, we'll try something else. If that doesn't work, we'll try something else. The point is, we're going to throw a bunch of things to the wall and see if they stick. America was not necessarily looking for perfection, like I said, but they were looking for action. And Roosevelt was somebody that was definitely dedicated to attempting to try to get America out of the depths of the Great Depression. When he took over, the unemployment rate was at 25%. So when Roosevelt takes office, the first thing that he does is he calls for a bank holiday. What this bank holiday is it shuts down every bank in the United States for an extended period of time. And what they're going to do here is they're going to have the federal government, the Treasury, go in and basically look over the books of the banks to see which banks are solvent or which ones are basically doing what they're supposed to. They have enough money in deposit. They're strong versus ones that are weaker, and they're going to shut them down until the government can ensure that before they open these banks up that they're actually in good shape and that people can trust them. Because the whole idea here is we have to trust our institutions, we have to trust our government, we have to trust our banks. If you don't have trust in the banks, you're not going to put money in the banks. If you don't put money in the banks, banks don't have money to loan out to other people. If banks don't have money to loan out to other people, then people can't get loans for cars, for homes, for larger durable goods, and the economy itself is going to continue to plummet. Um, when it comes to Roosevelt's new approach to America, I'm kind of going out of order here. So going back up here to Fireside Chats, he used the technology of radio, that mass media of radio, to reach directly into America's homes. Herbert Hoover was not somebody that made an extra effort to try to connect with the average person. Roosevelt did. Roosevelt did grow up in the upper class. Roosevelt was born, into a very wealthy family. Lived in Hyde Park, New York, which is a distant suburb of New York City. Yeah, his fifth cousins to Theodore Roosevelt. He grows up with plenty. As a younger man, his ambition is to be president. He becomes a lawyer. He becomes Assistant Secretary of the Navy in the 19 teens under Woodrow Wilson. But in 1920, he contracts polio. And from contracting polio and losing his ability to walk, and yes, he did spend his 12 years as president in a wheelchair, he understood what it was firsthand to suffer and what it was firsthand to have something that you love taken away from you and to reside for the rest of his life with this handicap. So he felt that he had a personal touch with the American people, and he would go on the radio every couple of months to speak directly with the American public to explain what it was he was doing, why he was doing it, why the economy was doing what it was doing, why the world was as it was, to try to reassure people that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. That's one of his famous quotes. But he was showing America through these fireside chats that he was willing to work with them and that he was willing to do whatever he could to bring us out of the Depression. And again, if it failed, he'd try again. He wasn't going away. He was going to be there throughout the duration. Now, skipping down here to the 100 days, if you ask, well, every president, if you like watch right now, Joe Biden is just the new president. You're going to hear people talk about what's he going to do in his first 100 days. He's going to talk about what he's going to do in his first 100 days. 100 days, that's a precedent that was established under Franklin Roosevelt. In the first 100 days that Franklin Roosevelt was president, the federal government passed 15 major legislative acts, so acts of legislation, new laws, and that is unprecedented. It's never happened before, and it's never happened since. But the federal government has become much more activist under Franklin Roosevelt. Amongst the 15 acts they passed, one was the Glass-Steagall Act, which created the FDIC. The FDIC is the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. If you walk into any bank today, you will see that they are FDIC insured, which means that each bank account is insured. Today in 2021, it's up to $250,000. So that means that if your bank fails, if it goes out of business tomorrow, if you have $5,000 in the bank, the government will insure that $5,000. So you will get a check from the federal government. So you can have complete faith and trust in the banks. These alphabet agencies. Roosevelt had critics. Roosevelt was not perfect by any means. If you're a big government liberal at this time, or if you're an American down on his or her luck and you're looking for the government to get involved to try to change the course of things, you're probably a Franklin Roosevelt supporter. If you're somebody that believes that the free market is where you should turn to in times of economic crisis and that the market will work itself out, and America, historically speaking, has not relied on its federal government to bail them out, that we have ebbs and flows, the economy goes up and down, but overall our economy has boomed throughout most of history, then you're probably somebody that did not support the Roosevelt years. So with the alphabet agencies, relief, recovery, reform here, he is creating dozens into the hundreds of government agencies. So you'll learn about these in your book: the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. You can pretty much throw together 2, 3, 4 letters and probably have a New Deal agency. So these agencies here are made fun of in these political cartoons. You see here, you have all these children dancing around them, like it's like a Ring Around the Rosie type of thing, or he looks like he's kind of in control of what they're doing here. You got the WPA, the PWA, that's Public Works Administration, the AAA is the Agricultural Adjustment Act. You have this man over here who's playing Scrabble with the different New Deal agencies. So again, all these New Deal agencies, the whole point was relief, recovery, reform, put people back to work, internal improvements, infrastructure, but obviously you're being paid by the federal government. So this is coming out of tax money. And yes, during the Great Depression, especially if you're wealthy, your taxes went way, way, way up. If you're in the wealthiest bunch of Americans, your taxes went up to the tune of 91% of your income. During the New Deal years, because the United States government is trying to propel the economy forward, to stimulate the economy, we start what they call deficit spending, or Keynesian economics, where if the average consumer can't stimulate the economy, it's the government's role to do that by pumping money into the economy through federal works projects, through direct relief like welfare, to get people to spend money to try to get back to leading their life the way that they had previously done. Our debts go way up during the Great Depression, obviously, and they continue that to this day. Looking forward here, I'm just going to show you a couple pictures from the Great Depression, some that you may have seen before that illustrate the Great Depression. This one here, it's a sign out in front, and this could be any town in America, from the Chamber of Commerce. It says, "Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own." It was up to, in most cases, federal and state governments, state and local governments to take care of people who were out of work. And so this sign is basically saying, we can't even take care of our own. We don't have enough money to supply people with food and housing. So if you're coming here looking for a handout, keep walking. This next slide here, you see people standing in a long line, probably waiting, looks like here, for bread. So they had bread lines, they had soup lines, they had lines people would wait for coffee and donuts. These were, again, paid for sometimes by wealthy people, or other times, most likely, by city and state governments. There's an example here. This guy at one point was a Wall Street broker. Now he's selling apples by the curbside for 5 cents a piece. And 5 cents, even by modern standards, is not very much. But it shows you, sadly, what some people had to resort to in order to try to make ends meet during the Great Depression. So selling apples at the corner was not a badge of honor. It was something showing that times were really tight and you were doing everything you could to try to keep yourself afloat. This sign here, very interesting. Obviously, it's a juxtaposition. In the background here, you have this, what looks like this perfect, happy family. You got the husband and wife, you got the daughter, you got the son, you got the dog hanging out the window. It looks like a kind of a newish car. It said, "World's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way," promoting American culture. And in the foreground here, you see a bunch of people here, predominantly African American, waiting in what we can anticipate is probably a soup line or a bread line, because minorities, while they, historically speaking, already suffered unemployment rates higher than white people during the Great Depression. Obviously, they suffered worse than mainstream white Americans. This picture right here is a picture of what we would dub, and this is a negative connotation here, Okies. People from Oklahoma, if you read the book, The Dust Bowl, so the Dust Bowl took place in the Midwest, Oklahoma, northern Texas, Nebraska, southeastern Colorado. But anyway, this picture here is indicative of the experience of farmers in the Midwest who suffered drought in the Dust Bowl. Because farm prices were declining in the 1920s, so many farmers had to rely on credit from banks. In the 1930s, a lot of banks were no longer willing to extend credit to farmers. Since they couldn't pay what they owed, they had their farms foreclosed and the banks took them over. So these people here, you can anticipate that this is probably one large extended family that probably lived on the farm. They're all getting together in this car or this truck that looks like it probably wouldn't make it very, very far. But their end destination, we can maybe assume, is California. During the Great Depression, California was seen by many, especially these out-of-work farmers, as being the promised land. And that's really dramatized in a book called The Grapes of Wrath, which came out in 1939. It was also made into a movie that year, which chronicles the Joad family and their move from Oklahoma to California and all the trials and tribulations that they faced in between. And the realization here is that California, since so many people saw it as the promised land, so many went to California to try to make a better way of life. But there's only so many jobs, there's only so much money to be doled out in California. And so these people may have gone to California looking to make it and may have been turned away at the border. There's a picture of a hobo encampment or a work encampment. It could be, I'm not sure exactly what state it was. A lot of these photographs were taken in California of people who went to document migrant workers to see what their plights were. So you can see all the, a lot of filth here. You see the little kid in overalls, this other little kid here. These tents are not heated, obviously, so at night it gets pretty cold. They lived in very, very primitive conditions. They're building this out of looks like canvas and packing board, or old boxes like crates, whatever they could find to make a temporary dwelling out of. This here is a picture of a dust storm. The farmers in the Midwest didn't obviously realize it at the time, but they planted so much wheat and so many agricultural cash crops that they weren't planting grass, they weren't planting trees, and so the soil itself just turned to dust in many cases. And this was happening during the beginning of the Great Depression. So talk about a perfect storm, no pun intended here. But the financial collapse, the agricultural collapse, farms being foreclosed upon, you got drought, and then you had these high winds that kick up and they pick up these dust storms. And some of these dust storms are so severe that the dust from the Midwest was carrying as far as New York City. This picture here, in my mind and in many people's minds, perfectly summarizes the feeling of helplessness, the plight of people during the Great Depression. This one here is called Migrant Mother. It's by a photojournalist named Dorothea Lange. It says here, if you can read the caption, this is destitute pea pickers in California. This mother of 7, age 32. As you can see here, there's a little boy here who's just finished breastfeeding. And women at this time, especially if you're nursing, you're not eating properly yourself. Your body's not getting its proper nutrients. There are some women that would lose their teeth. Obviously, their bones didn't take too well to this lack of nutrition. But these kids here, just this feeling of hopelessness, this look at despair, like all is lost, and not knowing what tomorrow is going to bring. All right, as time wears on, in the book we'll give you more information here, and I know that you're all carefully reading each page of the book. Because Roosevelt's passing so much legislation, the Supreme Court this time, the Congress this time, the Senate and House are heavily Democrat. So almost all of what Franklin Roosevelt wants, he's going to get as far as legislation. But the Supreme Court of the United States is weighing in, and they're striking down some of his New Deal legislation. So 1936, just after he wins a second term in office, he concocts this idea of court packing. Now, you heard about that this year when Donald Trump put a member of the Supreme Court on that turned the Supreme Court into 6 conservatives to 3 liberals. There was talk in some liberal circles, and some conservatives are pushing that if a Democrat were elected president, that they could potentially try to pack the Supreme Court to add more members to it. That actually was legitimately attempted in 1936 by Franklin Roosevelt. He's tried to add 6 members, 1 for each member of the Supreme Court over the age of 70. He would have made 15 Supreme Court, which would have made 15 Supreme Court judges. And the reason he wanted to do this is the president is the person that picks a new Supreme Court justice, and Congress, or the Senate confirms them. The Senate was heavily Democrat. There were many, including a lot of Democrats in 1936, who claimed that this would give Franklin Roosevelt dictatorial powers, because in that case here, you wouldn't have anybody checking or balancing your authority. And you have to realize, in the 1930s, there's a worldwide depression. This is the era of dictators. You have Hitler in Germany. You have Mussolini in Italy. You have Francisco Franco coming to power in Spain. You have Stalin in the Soviet Union. Now, Franklin Roosevelt is not a dictator in that realm, but dictators are people, you don't have to be violent or evil to have dictatorial power. The fear was here, if you don't have the check of the Supreme Court, that the president could pass whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it. And that was too much for some people, so that went down in flames. And there were some people that thought that Roosevelt was looking to grab too much power, but in his mind, he was doing it to try to get his legislation passed because he thought that was the best way to ease the Great Depression. There were critics of the Great Depression. There were critics of the New Deal. From the conservative side, you had the American Liberty League, who thinks taxes are too high, federal government involvement in everyday life is too much. Father Charles Coughlin, who was a radio preacher from Detroit, who was railing against the New Deal, saying it didn't go far enough to ease the plight of the downtrodden. You have Dr. Francis Townsend, who claimed that elderly people were not being taken care of. And Francis Townsend's beliefs actually led to Social Security that we have today, which we'll talk about in another lesson. Then on the right here, you have Senator Huey Long. His nickname was the Kingfish. He was the senator and governor from Louisiana. One of his famous quotes was, "Every man a king, but no man wears a crown." He wanted to tax up to 100% everybody's money after they made $1 million. The Share Our Wealth program, which during the depths of the Great Depression had a lot of resonance with people. In 1935, at the height of his power, when Roosevelt was seriously considering that this man could be a potential threat to his power, he was assassinated in Baton Rouge. But just for the record here, Roosevelt did accomplish a lot, got a lot passed, but he was not perfect, and he had many people in his era that were saying that his acts either didn't go far enough or that they gave him too much power. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.